In tonight's story, betrayal runs deep, but revenge runs deeper. You're listening to Revenge with Jack, where justice always finds its way. My name is Evan Mercer, 44, commercial architect, Savannah, Georgia. The night began with the small click of an email arriving at 11:22 p.m. Arizona time. Subject line empty. Inside, a single sentence from Sloan. I've moved your inheritance into my personal account. It's better this way. Attached, a blurry photo. Sloan on a balcony with a man whose beard caught the last orange of sunset. 2 glasses of wine. Her smile, unfamiliar, like a door I hadn't seen in our house opening to somewhere I didn't live. I closed the laptop gently. The room hummed with the old radiator and the ticking of the framed license on my office wall. The house felt like it had drawn its breath, waiting to see if I would shout. I didn't. I walked to the kitchen, poured water, stood at the window over the sink, and looked out at the backyard we had planned at a cafe table with pencil sketches and coffees gone cold. The stone path I laid by hand one humid July, slate pieces pressing into my palms. The hydrangeas Sloan planted along the edges, blue as a river bruise. All of it meant to guide us somewhere together. All of it suddenly looking like evidence of a story we'd told. The money she named wasn't just numbers on a line. $587,000 from Aunt Lila, the nurse who folded me into her life when grief was still loud in mine. Double shifts, packed lunches, a used sedan that always smelled like peppermint gum. She left me a neat envelope with 3 words I kept in my desk: build something that lasts. I'd repeated those words until they turned into my handwriting. No missed calls. No text asking if I'd seen it. Silence, like she was already practicing for the version of herself who lived elsewhere. It would have been easy to perform heartbreak right then. Break a glass. Dial a friend. But what I felt was a precise stillness, the kind I feel in a building before the first beam is set. Space clearing itself. I opened the laptop again. Read her sentence once more. Noted that there was no greeting, no name, only declaration. I typed 6 words. Thanks for letting me know. Sent. Closed. The reply wasn't for her. It was a pin on a map, a marker for where the ground changed. What Sloan didn't know, I had sensed the shift months ago. I had moved what mattered where her hands couldn't reach. The inheritance stood where Aunt Lila intended it to stand, girded and quiet. Tonight's email wasn't a loss. It was a blueprint of intent with a sunset attached. I rinsed the glass, turned off the light, went to the bedroom and lay in a bed that suddenly felt like a conference table where the meeting had adjourned. I expected the ceiling to press down. It didn't. I fell asleep quickly and deeply, the way a site sleeps after demolition, flat and clean, ready for lines. Tomorrow would be long. Strangely, I woke sure that something new had already begun. We met in the fluorescent hum of a Charlotte convention center, both pretending we weren't nervous. I had a portfolio tube and a suit that still carried the scent of drafting paper. She had mock-ups of teas and tinctures, the word wellness hand-lettered in a precise, airy font. Sloan said she wanted a space that felt like breathing. I sketched on a napkin, light wells, cedar, a long bench that warmed your spine. She laughed, not unkindly, and said, "You see rooms like other people see weather." We traded cards. I walked to my hotel under streetlights that made every pane of glass look deliberate. 3 years later, rings. Savannah, a craftsman on Victory Drive with a wraparound porch, the kind postcards love. We slept with windows open in spring. Learned the different languages of rain on a tin awning. No children. Her choice, said gently but firmly. The business is my baby. I understood. My buildings were mine, too. For 8 years, we looked like balance. My renderings, her product launches, our dinner parties where rosemary found its way into everything. Trips that produced photos with our faces in the lower third and horizons doing most of the work. People said we were good together because we moved at the same quiet speed. Then Aunt Lila's body decided otherwise. Cancer, fast and unsentimental. I took a 6-month partial leave and drove to Atlanta with overnight bags and a stack of crossword books she never touched. Hospitals have their own time zone. The steady drip, the hiss of doors, the way you start to measure days by which nurse knows your name. Sloan visited twice. Hospitals depress me, she said, fingers already on her car keys. I told her it was fine. Love is mostly letting someone be who they are and then learning what that costs. When Lila died, She left behind neat lists and a surprise. Investments I hadn't known about, compounded patience. The inheritance startled us both. Sloan suggested we scale her brand, distribution, a flagship studio, a line of furniture I'd design. I said I needed to think about what Lila would want. The first hairline crack. Not loud. Not even visible unless you trained your eye to find stress in a wall. Travel multiplied. 2 days became 4, then a week. Calls shortened, laughter in the background flattening to silence when I asked who was there. Walter Briggs next door mentioned a late-night drop-off the week I was in Boston. Tall guy, beard, gray Tesla. I thanked him for his wife's bread and pretended not to hear what he'd kindly already said out loud. Passwords changed. Banking apps that used to open like front doors now waited like guards. We should simplify, Sloan said, eyes on a middle distance. Conversations about money ended in steam. One night she took a phone call on the back steps, voice lower than I remembered it could go. Just Patricia from the studio, she said when she came in, using the name of someone who had left 8 months earlier. I didn't correct her. Architects learn this early. Foundations fail slowly, then suddenly. By the time the crack shows up in the paint, the fracture underneath has been traveling for years. The first alert came dressed as courtesy. A polite voicemail from Riverbank. Mr. Mercer, we've noticed unusual inquiries related to your trust profile. Then Cal Benton called, voice trimmed to the bone. Someone's testing your fences, he said. Bad at it, but persistent. He didn't have to say who. In design, we say intention leaves a shadow. You can read it on a wall, even when the light is wrong. I drove to Atlanta before the interstate heat thickened, the city stacking up like plans on a desk. Nadia Pierce received me with the dry focus of a person who has watched too many storms and learned how to label their parts. Her office smelled faintly of binders and lemon oil. We sat across a table that could hold a year's worth of evidence without sagging. I told her everything in sentences that felt like measurements. She listened. Lawyers, the good ones, let silence do a little work. Your aunt was wise, Nadia said at last, tapping the trust documents I'd carried like a passport. Irrevocable means exactly that. It's separated from marital assets. There's stewardship, not ownership, and none of it changes because someone sends a late-night email with confidence. She outlined the mechanics: layered authentication, beneficiary protections, event logs that record the temperature of a room simply by the heat of a keystroke. Money is dull until someone lies about it, she added, almost softly. Then it becomes narrative. We set up monitoring that would ping us for any movement around the trust, attempts, exports, backdoor peeks. Nadia called it a perimeter. I like the word. Architecture loves perimeters because they tell you what you must defend to keep a space honest. She had me sign a neat flock of forms. I signed with the steadiness of a person putting rebar into wet concrete. Back in Savannah, I found Sloan folding linen into her weekender. Might extend this one, she said. Really dive deep. I carried bags to her car, felt the weight of fabric, glass dropper bottles, a travel yoga mat rolled so tight it remembered another shape. She kissed me in a hurry that didn't reach her eyes and drove away wearing my sunglasses by mistake. I watched the street unspool behind her and went inside. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't open a drawer. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and logged into our shared cloud, the folder labeled Home Renovation Ideas, the place where we tucked backsplash samples and light fixture quotes like wishes. Inside, someone had mislabeled hunger as research. Screenshots of my accounts. Cropped statements. A photo of a whiteboard. Numbers in her angular handwriting. My inheritance amount minus 20% with transfer fee explanation written like a joke only one person thought was funny. Notes on protocols. Half accurate, half dreamed. Date stamps marching back months. I stared at the cursor pulsing over the file names and felt the room settle around what was true. Betrayal is less thunder than drift. It happens in the repetition of small edits until the original drawing can't be found. I closed the folder without printing a single page. No drama. The evidence didn't need me to make it louder. That night, I slept in the guest room, a narrow bed with a view of the pecan tree and the alley where kids practiced ollies after school. I woke early, made a list, and began. Calls. Copies. Quiet. Somewhere in Arizona, a sunset was rehearsing itself. Here, the morning laid down clean light, as if to say, measure twice, then cut. I gave the night its full measure. 24 hours like a line of chalk no one was allowed to smudge. In the morning, I forwarded Sloane's message to Cal and Nadia with a subject so small it could slip under any door. Documentation requested. No commentary. The sentence plus the sunset. Evidence doesn't need adjectives. It prefers timestamps. By mid-morning, I called Harlan Cho, the divorce attorney Nadia had mentioned once as if naming a reliable material. His assistant found room on his calendar that afternoon. Bring only what cannot be argued with, she said. We'll supply the rest. I printed nothing, carried everything on a slim drive that felt lighter than it should have. At noon, Sloane texted, "Did you get my email?" No punctuation, like the message was already walking away. I wrote back, "I did." A minute later, "That's all you have to say?" I let the phone rest on the desk, made coffee, watched the crema rise and fall. When I finally answered, I kept to short beams. "We can talk later." She called, breath already quick, the way wind picks up before a storm decides what kind of storm it wants to be. "This doesn't have to be hard," she said, skipping greeting. "The money's already moved. Fighting it only wastes more." "Where are you staying, Sloane?" A pause, the startled kind. "What does that matter?" "I'm mapping the work." "Scottsdale," she said, then hurried her voice past it. "I've retained counsel. We'll send terms." "Name?" Another pause. "Gavin Rook." I wrote it down like an address. "Thank you." She softened at the temperature of my tone. "It's for the best," she tried, gentler now. "We've been drifting." "You're right," I said. "Cleaner is better." Harlan's office lived above a bakery that made the hallway smell like warm sugar. He reviewed Nadia's memos, the trust structure, the audit trail. "Irrevocable as granite," he said. "We'll file under financial misconduct. Let the facts do the talking." I signed where he pointed, the pen skating across paper that sounded like snow under boots. At 6 on the dot, Nadia called. 3 blocked attempts today," she said, patience wrapped around steel. "All from the same IP range. Scottsdale, not Sedona." A quiet beat. "Also, a flagged export last month from your home network. Device ID matches a laptop that isn't yours." She forwarded the log. Time stacked like stair treads, each one a footprint. I thanked her and hung up. I stood in the kitchen, opened the bottle of scotch we'd been saving for a milestone that never chose us. Poured 2 fingers. The room was the same room. Its uses had changed. Sloane believed she'd laid a clean path, like moving money was only a matter of deciding to. But the floor she thought was level had sensors in it, tripwires strung through the grain. I raised the glass, not to triumph, but to clarity, the hard kind that lights up the fault lines with unkind accuracy. She'd built a story. I'd built a structure. Tonight, I knew which one would carry weight. Gavin Rook called at 9:07 a.m., voice smooth as a polished lobby. "Mr. Mercer, I represent your wife. She indicates you're amenable to a straightforward settlement." He paused, leaving room for me to step into a script. I didn't. "Which settlement would that be, specifically?" "Division of assets," he said, "including the recent inheritance funds." "Has she shown you confirmations of any transfer?" "Statements," he said carefully. "Transfer confirmations forthcoming." I looked at the quiet line of light under my office door. "And has she mentioned the structure of the inheritance? The irrevocable trust created by my aunt, the kind that can't be moved by midnight confidence?" Silence, brief but telling. "I'll review," he said, the air shifting a degree colder. "My counsel will send documentation," I replied. "Understood." We ended there, not with a thud, but with the soft click of a door that no longer opened. I drove to Riverbank, Savannah, where the manager, Harold, remembered our mortgage refinance and the porch photo Sloane made him take after we signed. He offered coffee, then turned his monitor toward me. Numbers arranged themselves with the tidy cruelty of a ledger. Transfers from our joint account to an external one I didn't recognize. First small, 2,000, 3,500. Then bolder, as if confidence accrues interest. 21,000. 32. 47, 2 weeks ago. The receiving bank. Desert Ridge Credit Union, Harold said, reading. Scottsdale. The name felt inevitable. He printed 6 months of history. Pages warm from the machine, like something recently alive. "I'm sorry," he said, the way tellers apologize for weather. I folded the stack into a folder and walked out past the bowl of free pens, the children's height table with coloring sheets of a cartoon vault. Outside, early heat pressed against the glass. I called Harlan from the parking lot. Desert Ridge. Scottsdale address on the account. Total withdrawals, 178,250. He exhaled once, a measured release. We folded into the complaint, he said. Separate from the trust. Systematic drain of marital funds, unilateral benefit, concealed account. Judges don't like that architecture. Back at the office, I spread the statements, watching amounts ladder upward like someone testing how much a floor will hold before it groans. This wasn't a stumble, it was pacing. A habit. I found the apartment address on the Desert Ridge paperwork, a complex with a pool shaped like a question mark. The lease began 8 months ago. Overlap with our calendar. Our dinners. Our shared groceries. The way she'd laughed at a show, I was sure we were watching together. Harlan's email arrived with a draft filing. Precise. Unheated. He asked for exhibits. I scanned and labeled each page. Source. Date. Amount. Destination. A thin architecture of facts, each beam bearing its quiet load. When the packet was complete, I looked at the clock and felt nothing dramatic. Just that small interior nod a builder gives when the footing's set. Pressure finds its level. Paper finds its weight. By evening, our case could stand without me holding it up. Names matter. They put edges on fog. I texted Sloan one question that had more gravity than it showed. Who is he? 20 minutes stretched thin. Finally, Grant. Last name? Ashby. Not important, she added, as if importance could be managed with adjectives. I searched while the kettle warmed. Grant Ashby surfaced in tidy squares. A Scottsdale yoga instructor smiling under skylights. A former investment broker who'd left the grind 3 years ago to pursue meaningful connection. The language of reinvention is always clean. You can't see the boxes it came in. I walked next door to Walter Briggs's porch with a paper bag of oranges I didn't need. You ever see the man who dropped Sloan off? I asked when we traded small weather and smaller baseball. Walter looked past me like memory sometimes sits over your shoulder. Tall, he said. Beard. Gray Tesla. Slow driver. Helped her carry a suitcase once. That him. I showed him a photo from the yoga studio's page. Grant framed in soft plants and softer light. Walter squinted, then nodded. That him. He didn't ask follow-ups, only said, "You want me to put that in writing?" I did. He did. His penmanship leaned right, as if even his letters were honest about the direction they were headed. That afternoon, Sloan upgraded her defense. Gavin Rook out, Philip Kane in, an attorney known for scorched earth tactics and glossy shoes. Harlan read the notice, then the calendar. Emergency hearing, he said. Monday morning. 3 days. The request claimed mutual decision-making around finances and consent for transfers. Consent, like the word could be stapled to behavior and make it legal. Let's give him something heavy to carry, I said. Harlan smiled with half his mouth, which is a lawyer's full laugh. We began assembling what would become a clean spine of proof. Nadia sent the trust access logs, attempts timestamped to the minute, IP addresses salted with Scottsdale. Riverbank records showed the stepping stones of siphoned funds. Desert Ridge paperwork gave us the Scottsdale apartment, the pool in its half-question mark. Walter's notarized statement added a doorbell and a driveway. I opened our shared cloud, the home renovation ideas folder, and printed the screenshots Sloan left there. My account numbers quartered into a grid, transfer protocols in a handwriting I used to recognize on cards and grocery lists. A photo of a whiteboard with the inheritance total minus 20% beside a neat note. Transfer fee explanation. I stacked each page with its sibling. Evidence likes family. I didn't feel victorious. I felt accurate. There's a quiet in truth, the kind that hums like a level on fresh studs, bubble-centered, lines agreeing. I thought of Aunt Lila, who charted everything from laundry days to mortgage payments in pencil, because pencil is honest about mistakes. We weren't erasing, we were revealing. Harlan slid the compiled packet into a binder and patted it like a patient dog. It reads, he said, and it reads well. Outside, the bakery downstairs exhaled sugar into the hallway. Monday waited like a building pad, graded, ready for forms. We had our footing. The rest would stand or fall on gravity. We didn't march into court with trumpets. Harlan prefers doorways to grand entrances. Friday afternoon, he walked our binder to Philip Kane's office the way an engineer carries a coarse sample. No flourish, just geology. I waited 2 blocks away at a cafe that varnished everything in espresso smell. The city moved around me, tourists staring up, a boy on a scooter stitching the curb. I held my phone face down and watched the window instead. Sometimes that's the only way to hear your own thinking. Harlan called an hour later. He's read it, he said, voice even. He'd like to talk settlement. I drank water, felt it land. No courtroom Monday. If this holds, he said. No. The word felt like shade after long sun. We met Kane in a conference room lined with framed verdicts and a plant that looked like it had been told to behave. He kept his tie perfect, even while admitting he'd been misinformed. Lawyers are good at rearranging furniture without breaking anything. He started with a clean split. She keeps what she's already taken, he said. No further claims on the inheritance or house. His tone suggested generosity. Paper rustled like a polite cough. I looked at Harlan. He didn't nod, didn't blink. We'd already rehearsed the counter the way you rehearse a fire drill. Not because you want a fire, but because buildings teach you it's foolish to pretend one never comes. I spoke slowly, as if laying a course of brick. Half of the siphoned joint funds returned within 24 hours, I said. Comprehensive non-disclosure. She makes no claims against the inheritance, the firm, or the house. In exchange, I don't pursue fraud related to the trust attempts. Kane's pen hovered midair. He glanced at the binder, then at us, as if pages could change their minds. You could ask for more, he said. Harlan opened his hands, the practiced gesture of a man who lets gravity argue. He isn't, Harlan said. He's asking for done. We left him to his client. Outside, late light pooled on the sidewalk in careful squares. I stood in it and thought about Aunt Lila counting tips at the kitchen table, bills in neat denominations, every dollar a stitch. She would approve of clean seams. King called it dusk. We're close, he said. She's processing. I pictured processing as a word trying on different coats in a mirror. Monday morning, consultation room, he added. No judge. I thanked him and hung up. Back home, I set the agreement draft beside the folded laundry. Ordinary things next to consequential ones. That's how most lives arrange themselves. I walked the rooms that no longer performed as home, touching surfaces the way you do before a move. Doorknob, banister, the edge of a frame. Small farewell gestures to objects that don't notice. In the guest room, I sat on the narrow bed and listened to the house breathe through the vents. I didn't feel like a winner or a victim. I felt like a builder at the end of poor day, boots heavy with concrete dust, knowing the slab would cure whether I watched or not. Monday morning didn't dress like drama. The courthouse hallways smelled faintly of floor polish and coffee that had been waiting too long. Harlan and I took a consultation room with glass on two sides, the kind of transparency that pretends to be mercy. The city moved beyond the windows in small squares, heels, briefcases, a child's hand in a larger hand. I placed a pen parallel to the table's edge and felt my pulse settle into workable tempo. They arrived together, Sloan in a jacket that wanted to be armor, Philip Kane carrying a leather folder that already knew the choreography. Through the glass I saw the first flicker, defiance giving way to calculation. Harlan opened the binder and laid the pages in a calm sequence. Trust logs with their stubborn timestamps, bank statements stepping upward in amounts, the Desert Ridge lease with its Scottsdale address, Walter's notarized words written in his right-leaning truth, and the screenshots from the home renovation ideas folder where intention had written itself in ink it thought was private. Sloane's face moved through 3 rooms. Disbelief, then heat, then a tiredness I recognized from the end of long travel days when you wait for a suitcase that doesn't belong to you. Kane leaned in, read like a man counting studs in a wall. He whispered. She nodded without taking her eyes off the page that held the whiteboard photo. The inheritance total, the minus 20%, the neat transfer fee explanation. I watched a single muscle in her jaw decide to be still. Kane cleared his throat, the official sound of a pivot. My client accepts the terms, he said. Harlan placed the settlement where signatures wait. The room felt larger by an inch. Sloan signed first, her handwriting a little less certain than the last time I'd watched it move across anything. I signed after, my name landing with the weight of a beam that finally finds its column. I slid a separate envelope toward her, plain, unsealed. She looked at it as if it might announce itself. What's this? She asked, voice quiet enough to belong to another scene. Passwords, I said. Cloud. Alarm. Anything you might need to collect what's yours. Our eyes met, not as a bridge, more like a level held between us to show that the bubble had finally centered. She searched my face for anger I wasn't carrying. Finding none, she seemed more lost than furious. It was never about the money, I said. The sentence surprised me with how little air it needed. That would have been simpler. Kane touched her elbow, a reminder that the choreography had more steps. Filing, copies, moving on. She gathered the envelope like light, stood, and left without looking back. The glass caught her reflection and gave it to the hallway. When the door closed, the room replaced her with quiet. Harlan stacked our pages, corners aligned. Clean, he said, and I heard approval, not victory. We walked out past the vending machines and the corkboard where public notices wait for eyes. Outside, the day was bright in the way new concrete is bright. We didn't celebrate. We didn't need to. The structure stood. 6 months later, the craftsman belonged to a family who loved it the right way. Double strollers on the porch, crayons left uncapped on the dining table, hydrangeas beaded with sprinkler water like sequins. I handed over the keys and touched the banister one last time, the way you pat a good dog and tell it did its job. The house had carried more than furniture. It deserved laughter that showed up on time. I drove downtown with the back seat empty and felt light in a way that had nothing to do with weight. The loft surprised me. Brick walls that remembered other centuries. Light that arrived like a well-mannered guest. On time, grateful, unassuming. I kept less. A table that could host blueprints or dinner. 2 chairs, the bed that didn't sprawl. I slept with the windows cracked and learned the signatures of the street. The violinist 3 blocks over. The low horn of cargo ships turning on the river. Footsteps that paused and then decided. Nadia and I met every other Thursday and turned Aunt Lila's care into a structure with edges, the Lila Mercer Foundation. Scholarships for students who'd been orphaned or nearly. Architecture, design, any craft that made shelter feel like more than physics. We drew bylaws at her conference table and laughed at how governance is really just labeling good intentions correctly. Cal joined the board, his spreadsheets tidier than pews. We picked our first recipient in late summer. Marisol, 17, from a town that starts at a pecan grove and ends at a water tower. Her essay carried a sentence I read twice. Spaces can hold you without holding you back. Nadia looked up and smiled. Lila would have loved her. I believed it in my bones. On a Wednesday that smelled like rain, an envelope with no return address waited in the lobby mailbox. White, ordinary, patient. Inside, a cashier's check for exactly $89,275 and a note on hotel stationery. 2 lines in a tidy, careful hand. The rest of what I owed. Not just the money. No signature. The amount found its place on a ledger in my head. The sentence found a quieter place where sentences go when they've done enough harm and are trying to learn new work. I walked to the river with the envelope, like you carry something that could become a bridge if you treat it right. Barges slid by with their steel patience. Tourists took photos of sky as if it might forget itself. I thought of the kids who would sit at drawing boards because one woman saved and another refused to spend it breaking. I thought of Lila counting tips in that old kitchen, whispering totals as if each number were a prayer that hadn't learned ceremony yet. Back at the loft, I slipped the check into the foundation folder. Another scholarship, maybe 2. Another chance to make a room where someone young can stand and feel, for a breath, both sheltered and strong. I texted Nadia, new funds in hand, will drop by tomorrow. She replied with a simple heart and a calendar emoji. Clean symbols for clean moves. The city dimmed toward evening. Somewhere, a door closed with the soft click of a chapter that knows it can be grateful without wanting to return. Evening leaned in the windows the way an old friend leans on a porch rail. Unhurried, not asking for anything. I walked the riverfront where Sloane and I once sketched a joint venture on a napkin. Her program, my lines, 2 futures pretending to be one. The water kept its slow grammar. Tugboats blinked like careful thoughts. I took the check from my pocket and turned it over in my hands. It would become tuition, paper turned into time, time turned into rooms. I liked the conversion rate. Cal texted, dinner's still on for 7. Bringing that architect I mentioned. I typed, I'll be there. Then put the phone away and watched a barge thread the bend. I remembered Aunt Lila telling me, after one of my first sight failures, that nothing honest is ever truly gone. It just waits in a different shape. Loss, she said, is a good teacher if you stop interrupting it. I let the river make its case for patience. It didn't oversell. The path back to the loft took me past glass that threw my reflection back at me. Older, lighter, unadorned. I thought about what we build when we aren't building houses. The quiet habits. The way we speak to the person we are when rooms are empty. I unlocked my door, showered, changed into a shirt that understood restaurants, and stood for a second with my hands on the back of a chair. I realized I did not dread conversation. I didn't need to be impressive. I only needed to be present. The restaurant was all brick and low bulbs, a soundtrack that stayed politely in the background. Cal waved me over, stood to hug in his efficient way, and introduced Mira, structural engineer, not architect, who corrected him with a smile. Her handshake held the confidence of someone who has convinced steel to behave. We talked about spans and weather and why some bridges make a person feel taller just for crossing them. She laughed at one of my stories about a client who wanted a staircase without risers or gravity. It felt like sitting in a room that knew exactly what it was for. When dessert arrived, we split one without negotiation. Mira asked about the foundation. I told her about Marisol, the essay, the sentence that moved the air. Spaces can hold you without holding you back, she repeated, tasting it the way you taste a sauce, checking for balance. That's good work, Evan. I felt the compliment land where it should, not on my ego but on the table of my days, steadying it. We walked out to a city that had cooled to the temperature of promise. Cal peeled off toward his car with a salute. Mira and I went the other way, not far, just enough to feel the night choose us. At the corner we traded numbers with no theater. Let me know when you pour something new, she said. I like watching things take shape. After she turned, I stood for a moment, letting the boundary of the day click into place. Betrayal had been an ending. Rebuilding was a beginning with better math. On the walk home, the river sounded like a pencil moving across paper. I could almost hear a new line forming.